All right, welcome. So I thought it might be fun to start a series on algorithm challenges where we use JavaScript to solve programming puzzles. So I am going to use JavaScript, but you can do these challenges in many other languages since the fundamentals of programming are essentially the same. And I'm also going to be using Microsoft Visual Studio Code to create these or create and run these programs, but you can use any other environment that you'd like. So for this first one, I thought it would be fun to try to create an algorithm that will find the largest number in an array without using pre-built functions like math.max. So here I created a variable called ARR and I set it equal to this array of randomly selected numbers that I just typed in. So I encourage you to actually try out these challenges yourself before looking at my solution. So why don't you actually go ahead and pause the video and try this challenge out for yourself. So let's try to understand this challenge. We want to take this array and we want to look at each number and we want to try to figure out which one is the largest value in this array. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable called max and I'm going to set it equal to the very first element of the array. And remember, array indices in JavaScript start at 0. So 0 is referring to this very first element, which is 70. So our max variable is set to 70. Now, I know I need to loop through each element of this array and compare it to whatever the current value of max is. And if I run into a value that is larger than max, then I want to set max equal to that value. So I think a for loop would be pretty handy in this situation. So in JavaScript, there are a few things we need to do to create a for loop. Or inside these parentheses, we need to create a counter variable I'll just call I. And we need to say something like I is less than arr.length. And we want to increment I. So what this is doing is we're initializing a counter variable I and setting it equal to 0. And then we are telling JavaScript to run this for loop so long as I is less than the length of the array. And for every iteration of this loop, we want to increment I by 1. So every time the loop runs, we want to increase I by 1. All right, so now that we have the for loop in play, we can go ahead and write a conditional statement. If ARR_I is greater than or equal to whatever the current value of max is, then I want you to set max equal to that value in the array. So what this is doing is that I is going to start at 0. So in this conditional, we're actually going to go ahead and for each iteration of the loop, we're going to look at ARR_I. So if I is 0, we're going to look at the first element. If I is 1, we're going to look at the second element. If I is 2, we're going to look at the third element, and so on and so forth. And we're going to compare every single one of those values to max. And if that value in the array is greater than or equal to max, we're going to set max equal to that value. And if it's not, then nothing's going to happen. So outside that for loop, we can go ahead and console.log max, and all this is going to do is it's going to display to the console, it's going to write to the console the value of max. If I go ahead and run this code, we can see that the value 93 is printed out in the console. And so let's check that. 93 does seem to be the largest value in this array. So that means our little segment of code that we wrote does in fact seek out the largest value of the array. What I can also do here is that I can, inside this if conditional statement, I can console.log something like setting max to and then plus max. And what this is going to do is anytime this statement is true, anytime the program finds a value that is larger than the current value of max, it's going to print out setting max to whatever the value of max is here. So let's go ahead and save and run this. And that's kind of cool. We can see that the very first iteration, it's setting max equal to 70. So when I is 0, ARR0 is referring to this 70 element. And we said if that element is greater than or equal to max, then I want you to set max equal to that element. And that's exactly what it's doing in this iteration of the code. Now, when I is 1, we're comparing 65 to max, but 65 is less than our current value of max, which is 70, so nothing's going to happen in this if statement. And it's going to keep iterating until it gets to this 93, which is in fact greater than 70, so it's going to say, hey, I'm setting max to 93. And it's going to keep going and checking the rest of the values, but it's already found the maximum value, so at the end of the for loop or outside the for loop, JavaScript is going to spit out max. So now, what if we wanted to actually grab the minimum value in this array? Well, we can kind of use the same code, so I'm actually going to go ahead and block out this code and copy this down here. And instead of saying max, we're going to go ahead and change this to min, and that's going to set 70 equal to min. And down here in our conditional statement, instead of checking ARRI is greater than or equal to max, I'm going to change this to min. And I'm going to see if the current value of ARRI is less than our current value of min. And if it is, we're going to set min equal to that value. And here I can put setting min to min. And we're going to console log min at the very end. So if I save and run this code, we see that at the very start of this program, we're going to set min equal to ARR0, which in this case is 70. And this for loop is going to iterate through every element of that array, and it's going to check if that current element is less than min. And if it is, then it's going to set that current value of ARRI equal to min, and it's going to display setting min to min. And as you can see here, the minimum value is 2, which if we check in this array, 2 is indeed the lowest value in this array.